right, welcome to another episode of the Endurance Matters podcast. I am your host, Justin Metzler, and I am thrilled today to have remote, not in studio, Melanie McQuaid. She is an XTERRA World Champion, Ironman World Champion. Honestly, she's a legend of triathlon whose presence and accolades span decades. So welcome to the show, Melanie.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin. This is really exciting. I'm just so honored to be on your show.
Absolutely. Well, I start off the show with the icebreaker question. So for you today, I've got this one. You have done so many races that my fingers got tired scrolling through the results sheet. But my question is, what is the best and most special place that you've raced? And what is the worst place that you would never go to again, even if they paid you?
Oh, gee. Oh, no. Okay, I think the best place I ever raced actually was racing a World Cup in Annecy, France. Annecy, France is just a spectacular city with this like incredible lake and this, really old style, like exactly what you would picture for like your typical European mountain town. Best trails, it's beautiful. So Annecy, France was probably a top of all those races. Wow, the worst. We went to some pretty rough and tumble places for mountain biking. I think by and large in triathlon, we're pretty lucky. Like these towns, like if you have a body of water that you're capable of swimming in, and particularly for XTERRA with trails, like almost all the XTERRA venues are spectacular because, if you like the mountains. I think, that one's tough. I think one town that, had really nice people, but maybe wasn't, oh man, I don't want to be crapping on anybody's town.
You're Canadian. You're so nice.
I can't.
Right.
Because you go to these towns and we're there for the weekend, and maybe our experience is colored by the race experience or
totally.
And there's just something about that town that I didn't get the locals to show me, and so for me to disparage their community, I can't do it.
All right, that's fair play.
even the worst places weren't that bad.
I'm with you. I feel like the people really make it. Even if you go to a place that's pretty dumpy, there's always good people. I think, especially if you're there trying to race, there's always going to be somebody who you meet, or at least one thing you can extract from the experience that is a positive thing. So that's a fair omission of an answer. But all right, so let's get into it a little bit. Why don't you start off by telling us about I think you grew up in British Columbia in Canada, so talk to us about that and sort of what your upbringing was like and how you got into sports.
Okay, yeah. So I was actually born in Ontario, which is like a province far east. But my family moved to BC, and we lived in a remote town named Prince George, which is pretty far north. It's like Bears, minus 40 Celsius, that kind of town. And so I grew up in a pretty rural community where we had horses. And so I was a horseback rider. I did rodeo queen. I was terrible, but I did stuff like that. I just rode my bike to school and whatever. I think my first, the first signs I really was into athletics was we lived so far out of town that I couldn't actually join the swim team because it was 40 kilometers in each direction to get to the pool. And so my parents said, well, no, we can't drive you the swim team. But I would go for random swimming lessons because we lived next to a river, and I'd always see the swim team and I was like, oh, I want to be a swimmer and all this stuff. So when I was in grade 8, we moved to a town called Nanaimo, and immediately I was like, okay, we're near enough the pool. I joined the swim team. But at that point I was already 12, and it's kind of over for swim team if you start quite late.
Sure.
And also I had a lot of high school stuff going on. So I actually spent about a year swimming with the swim team, and I was dedicated. I rode my bike in the winter. I rode my bike at 5 a.m. I did lots of it. Went to provincial championships. I was okay, but I basically spent about a year and a half as a swimmer, and then I was in a pretty demanding program called the International Baccalaureate in high school. And so there's just lots of high school and whatever that sort of demanded my attention. And I dabbled. I really enjoyed training and being fit. But I quit the swim team, and I, did the track team, and I did the cycling team on my dad's bike, which in high school is not even close. It's not even organized intramural sports. It's like, at that time it was just like ride a bike around, which I was doing to get to school anyways. And so like, I don't think that there was anything about my early career that really indicated anything about anything. And it wasn't until I was about 20 and in university that I was at University of Victoria, and we had like a really strong athlete named Alison Sider, who went to UVic, who was also one of the top mountain bikers in the world. And there just was so many, I could just draw so many parallels between like her development, even though she was like well ahead of me. Like she was already 12 years, had already gone to the Olympics and all this stuff. But I could see that there was this possibility of being like a really good athlete. And I had a boyfriend at the time that introduced me to mountain biking. And then I got sort of talent ID'd for cycling. And so I actually had some early opportunities with the British Columbia cycling team to go and race on the road. I went to Canada Games, which is like a junior Olympics type thing with no ability. Like it's basically like, hey, not ability, but like no experience. Like they took us to nationals. I'd never done a time trial. I was like, it's like some of my like initial rides in a group. And that year, like, and that opportunity just sort of, lit a fire where I was like, originally I had been thinking, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm pre-med. I'm taking all these science courses. And then I was like, no, I think I'm going to be a professional athlete. Only because I could see it was a remote, but it was like somewhat an opportunity. And so that was that.
I guess like fast forward a little bit in terms of how seriously you were taking that, what the training environment was like. And I think at that point, the objective was probably the Olympic Games in 2000. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I came in and like, I think I started mountain biking, went to the World Championships in Vail in 1993. So my first year I made the national team. I went to World Championships. And then right after that was at 96. Was the first, 1996, I think, was the first time that mountain biking was in the Olympics. And so it materially changed, all through that time, the format of racing was changing. It's not unlike the experience that ITU athletes have had over the past few years, because as like they are grooming a sport for the Olympics, how the sport was born and how people participated and raced the sport was changing. Like we went from these 2.5 hour like long loops in remote places and epic trails to more of the loop format. They started, instead of the mass start, they started separating the elite field. And I was part of all of that as it, like the first Olympics was 96 and I was like not on the radar for that one. It was like very clear who was going, but I thought maybe for 2000. And so, that was the original part of my career. I actually had a professional contract in 1997. I raced like the World Cup. My trade team was more continental. And so I raced for Rocky Mountain, which I think is a Canadian rite of passage. And I raced the World Cup in Europe for quite a few years. And when 2000 rolled around, like as we fast forward, the Olympics that year were early. And so as a result, the team was selected quite early. And I knew really early in the year that I was not on the Olympic team. And that was sort of like a crossroads for me. Okay, what am I going to do with the rest of my year? Because, the Olympic year is so different. And so I did have an opportunity to race on the road. I became a composite rider with a lot of with some pro teams in the US. And at the time when we were training for mountain biking, we did a lot of road stage racing. So I did like I had experience with the 2-week Hewlett Packard women's race. So I had what would be the equivalent of like women's world tour racing we did as part of our training back then. So it was pretty easy for me to get a start with a race team because, I'd done Redlands that year and all that stuff. So I basically thought, okay, well, I didn't make the mountain bike team. I'm not good enough for that. Maybe I'll try my luck at road. And I had opportunities there. And And that year at Nationals and before Nationals, at a major stage race that was before Nationals, I performed really well, and I got selected to the national team for the road. I went to France to race the Road World Championships, and at that point I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be a roadie now. But that same year, I was invited by the Team Unlimited group to go race the XTERRA in Hawaii, and I thought, oh, that'll be fun. Like, a bunch of the mountain bike team was going, and that was their whole thing, was to try and get the best mountain bikers to race against the triathletes and maybe some runners, and like just see who was the best out at, like, it was kind of like a novelty event that was fun. And so I, without a lot of training, because I had been in France just before that doing the Road Worlds, and all I did was get wet riding in the rain and crash at the Worlds. So without much running or swimming, I went to Maui, and that race was like truly transformative because I was second. I had an 8-minute lead coming off the bike and still got run down in 10 kilometers, which is pretty sad. But the prize money was like the most money I'd ever seen. The vibe was the best ever. And it just kind of was a sport that really just matched sort of my athletic history in a weird way. So it just seemed like an obvious fit. And shortly after that, I joined the National Triathlon Center and was like, okay, I think that this is more suited to be the sport for me.
Cool. So how developed at that point were you as a cyclist versus, okay, I'm shifting completely into the triathlon world because you have the success? Were you still obligated to do some cycling, or were you full on in the triathlon scene at that point?
There's a little wrinkle of negativity in there because I did have a trade team. Unfortunately, that trade team was run by like a very unethical, and he was later banned from the sport for issues with Genevieve Johnson, a young athlete. Like, I was on the Rona team early, and I think a lot of Canadians, maybe some people, understand like the history of Andre Aubut. So I was like contracted to race with that team, and I would have like fulfilled my obligations. I went to Redlands with the team that year. I was top 20 as a domestique for the rider that won. And he told me I was too fat and slow, and he was like not going to race me, which actually kind of pushed me, like basically forced me into triathlon and triathlon and back to mountain biking because I wasn't allowed to race on the road. So I don't know if originally I had any plans to like make this full transition that year, but he like forced my hand because when you have a UCI contract, you can't race unless your team releases you. So he wouldn't release me. So anyhow, I then went and started training with the National Triathlon Center and kind of went like full on. I did some mountain biking that year. And honestly, like that year, trying to do the triathlon program when you're a mountain biker, and back then the triathlon program was really focused on like swimming and running, both things that at that point in my career I was very weak. So I did immerse myself in that environment. I didn't perform well at XTERRA that year. But I learned a lot. And so that became my immersion in the triathlon scene. I did some ITU all through 2001 and 2 as well as part of that, development.
Cool. And at this point, had you completely left academics behind? Are you saying, okay, the traditional pathway is not for me. I'm a professional athlete here for the foreseeable future, whatever that is, cycling, triathlon, mountain bike?
I think it took me until 2006 to properly get my degree. But I did get a double major, or I got a major in chemistry and a minor in biochemistry. So I can't remember how I met, like, because I did co-op, it was taking me forever to do my degree or anyways. So I would like work for a semester and then do school. But I feel like by that point I may have been finished my classes, but actually hadn't applied to graduate yet. So I think at that point in my career, I truly believed that I was going to be a professional athlete. So I had no intention of going back my dad reminded me that he paid for my MCAT and I didn't show up. So, so I think I was all in.
As a triathlon coach, I'm constantly trying to monitor my athletes' well-being and health while we're trying to get all of the training done that they need in preparation for a race. And my process is sort of, my athletes will go and they'll execute their training plan on a week-to-week basis. They'll leave me comments after those sessions, and then pretty much every 24 to 48 hours, I'll go in, analyze the training, comment back where necessary. But sometimes things slip through the cracks with that time frame. Athletes can always text me, but even then, I might be out on a 4 or 5 hour bike ride, not be able to see the text until later in the afternoon. And that's where Algo Training comes in. This is a platform that uses an AI assistant to be able to analyze athletes' voice notes. So maybe those red flags of, hey, my knee's feeling a little bit funny, or I'm feeling a little bit sick, get notified to me sooner than maybe what happened in the past. So this is a totally new training platform. I'm really looking forward to implementing it with my athletes and seeing how we can maybe benefit and open up our lines of communication and feedback if things do go wrong or if we want to just optimize. So head over to augotraining.com. That's AUGO training.com, launching March of 2026. Cool. Well, I want to definitely dive more into the XTERRA side of things. I want to hear more a little bit about the training. I guess like you alluded to it a little bit with going and training with the training center and maybe working with some of the ITU folks. It seemed as though you had this base of mountain biking. So walk me through the training. So it didn't work the first year, but then it obviously did work the next 2 seasons when you won world titles again, or you picked up world titles, I guess 3 sort of in a row, 3 out of 4 years there, 2003, 2005, 2006. So what clicked, I guess, over that period of time?
Well, I think the important thing to the context of the time is that ITU triathlon had a certain athlete type that was winning those kind of races. And most coaches really didn't understand what XTERRA was in particular. And so they certainly wouldn't know what the demands were of mountain biking. And so the reality was that there weren't coaches that understood the specifics of my sport. And so when I was going in and training a program that was designed to help athletes that are really strong swimmers and really strong runners survive the bike, that program leaned too heavily on some weaknesses for me and didn't help me to maintain my strengths. And so that's exactly what happened. I lost power and I just couldn't ride my mountain bike because I was simply not riding enough and I was swimming way too much, right? Because honestly, I swam that much and I got better, but I wasn't really it wasn't required for my sport at the level of swimming that I could do. And so I think it was just costing me too much energy that was drawing away from my mountain biking. And so in 2002, I had the opportunity to stay in the center, but I kind of decided to take ownership of my own program. And so I would be like a quarterback and I would fit myself into the sessions as best I could and be a training partner for athletes in the National Center. I kind of stopped going to ITU races and then went more back to some mountain bike races. And so I would train myself more as a mountain biker with swimming and running alongside, because running for XTERRA is very much a strength run and a lot of uphill, and it doesn't require quite as much, it does, but it doesn't, as much leg speed and tempo work, because there's so much crossover from the mountain biking for that sport. And so the difference was that I just started coaching myself. And that's where I think my deep dive into understanding coaching and physiology and what's required. And I took really detailed notes and I would follow along. And I had great mentorship with coaches that really helped me to learn. At the time I had Paul Regensburg was allowing me to be in the center, and he was originally my coach, but he was okay with me staying and then taking over because it was obvious I wasn't performing in my primary sport with the program itself. And then I had a coach named Hushang Amiri that because my mountain biking was still pretty good, I actually qualified to be in the National Cycling Center too. So I was sort of straddling these two centers that were out of the same facility, and Hushang really he was a primary contact in mentoring me on understanding, what consistent long-term work is, and also helping me to understand that, you don't have to train everything all at once. There's lots of crossover and just being patient with development. So he was a great teacher in understanding, coaching, in general. And then I also had another, there was a Dan Prue who ended up being like the mountain bike coach that, coached a lot of world champions and Olympians. He actually also was a great mentor for me. And when I would sit down with him and show him, okay, here's my annual plan. Like, what do you think of this? And like, does this make sense? And whatever. And he's like, this is amazing. You know exactly what you're doing. So these coaches were like really influential in giving me the confidence that I could do these things, with being a sounding board to like help me to learn. And so I think I became my own best coach as a result of this, just having that sort of support network where I would just take the primary responsibility for everything. And then I would just reach out in areas that I needed help.
Cool. Can you elaborate a little bit more for us, like the nature of the relationship with the training center, I guess, like on the cycling side and on the triathlon side? Because I think that's maybe not something, at least in America, that athletes really have access to. It's like you have training groups, you have the National Training Center in Colorado Springs or whatever, but unless you're an Olympic athlete who's funded by a federation, you have zero accessibility to that. So how did you position yourself to be able to, other than qualifying on the cycling side based off your results, how did you get this accessibility to the athletes, to the coaches, and to the facilities?
Well, I think this was a really special time in triathlon. We had this triathlon center, and their mandate at the time was to bring in good athletes and good training partners from elsewhere. And so I think I was brought in because I was strong and could maybe like add something from a cycling perspective. I know that Greg and Laura Bennett came in and trained with Simon at that time in the center. So did Bevan Doherty. So Hamish Carter. So they were like, hey, we're here training hard. If you want to come here and train with us and help us, help us get better by being a part of this, then you're invited. And so it wasn't as insular in terms of a national center that has like a primary, you can only race ITU middle distance or whatever, because at the time I think Greg Bennett was doing a lot of the non-drafting Olympic stuff. Like he actually wasn't even really as much in the ITU scene anymore. So it was a good time, because that's how the center, it was a good time to be part of that because it was a lot more open as long as, and I think there was fees associated with it, but you could come in and be a part of it. You were invited. Cool. Now that didn't last, as things progressed, it went back to like, okay, we have a national team program that is only open to national team athletes. And that also failed. And so what's happening now is what we had in the center is now being resuscitated by the 94 Forward organization here in Victoria to try to bring back that opportunity to centralize excellence in Victoria and have this opportunity to have a variety of athletes that are elite from a variety of different sports, create the ultimate training environment to bring the most talented athletes to the Olympics. And, you cannot just have you don't have enough athletes that are actually going to make it to the Olympics to create an environment for them to succeed. You need to have a critical mass of training partners and opportunities and exposure. And that's what they're doing. They're making Victoria the place to come for an amazing swim program, incredible trails to run on, and just reinforcing what we had back there between 2000 and I want to say maybe up to 2006 or something. I can't remember how long that lasted.
Cool. Yeah, I've been to Victoria one time. I raced a 70.3 there, and then good friend of mine and friend of the podcast, Matt Sharp, is from there, and he speaks very highly of the Victoria area. Anyways, I am curious to hear a little bit more about that XTERRA time period when you sort of come in, you dominate sort of shortly after you get exposed to it, you really get into it. Talk to us a little bit about the economics around XTERRA at that point. Like you mentioned, coming second was the most prize money that you had made, but was it still enough for you to have a career so singularly focusing more or less on XTERRA? And was there, I guess, established sponsorship and eyes on the races at that time?
So I think when I came in at exactly the right time for the rise of XTERRA. So I think, I want to say the first, I can't remember, I might have won $5,000 at the Worlds that year. And if I think about the economics of my lifestyle at that time, I think that funded my life
I get that. Yeah.
I was living in a tent, or I don't know how I survived on that, but like that was like an insane amount of money.
Totally.
And so I like, I don't know, I survived. And I like, my parents weren't helping me. Like I lived in Victoria off like your ability to stretch a dollar when you're like, I want to do this is incredible. But I'm sure I had lots of support. Like I said, I think that like some of my coaching fees and stuff like that, I think I was helped out by, the cycling thing. I might have qualified for a level to like reduce the fees for the triathlon center. So it was more like, go to races and potentially win some money. So I was at the win some money phase of sponsorship early. I think by 2003, I started to get some more sponsors, because in 2002, I bombed out at the Worlds. But what was happening at that time is while I was coaching myself, my mountain biking had a renaissance. And so I would come out in the spring, and I think I won like this Cactus Cup McDowell Mountain race, like this early season Phoenix race. I think I might have won that one year, but and they're all the best mountain bikers were there. And I was an XTERRA athlete at that time. And so I was getting some attention from a mountain biking perspective. And then one year at Sea Otter, I think like this is fast forwarding to maybe 2004 or 5, but one year at Sea Otter, I won the short track and I was top 5 overall. So these were the top mountain bikers in the world, and I was competing at that level while I was a triathlete, and that was sort of like allowing me to get some sponsorship from the cycling scene and incorporate those races into my schedule. And then also the prize money for XTERRA, by the time it was 2003, I was starting to like place first or second at everything. And those races were about 2,200 to win. And so if like you came first, second, or third, you're probably making like at least $1,500, let's say, for going. And again, since I was a dirtbag, I could afford to go to races. And there were lots. And that is the different economics of XTERRA, is that we had like 8 races a year. You could recover and do 2 in a row in one trip. And there was a homestay program in place early, so I never paid for accommodation. And I raced XTERRA for probably 12 years, and I went back to the same place at least 12 times sometimes. So cool. The economics of it kind of made sense because there was a pro support network in place.
Cool. Yeah, I can resonate with that quite a lot, because Jeannie and I were doing kind of the same thing early in our career. And I remember there was a period of time where I went back and forth to China 6 times in 18 months, pretty much for the same reason, because I could go and make $2,000 and they would put me up in a hotel, and then I could maybe get on the podium and get a sponsor bonus, and then come back with $3,000, and that was our rent for 6 months. And so anyways, I understand the dirtbag athlete lifestyle really well. I want to talk a little bit more about the exit from XTERRA and sort of transitioning to on the road triathlon. When did that happen, and why did it happen?
So I think my last real year of XTERRA was 2011. And in 2011, a lot of like life things happened at the same time. So in 2011, I went to the first ITU Worlds for Cross Triathlon in Spain. And I won that. And then I had like an incredible season. I won probably most races ever. And I won the series. And I think I won the nationals. And I was like a pretty heavy favorite for Worlds. And between nationals and Worlds, my relationship ended in a really like nasty way. And I was not in a good mental place at Worlds. And then I'm sure it was like errors in preparation for that race. But like I had a major meltdown where I like collapsed 30 yards from the finish line after leading the race by, again, 8 minutes coming off the bike. And I DNF'd that race. And I think at that point, sometimes you get philosophical about things. And I thought in my mind, okay, well, I think Hawaii is done with me. And so I think that it's time for me to move on. And certainly I was supported in that decision by my move to Trek, because I made it to the Trek factory racing team, which was like easily the highest level and most professional organization I've ever been a part of. It was a career highlight to like actually make it to that team. And I think like during that time, they're like, hey, we really like the fact that you're so versatile and we support you in doing that. but we are a triathlon team and we do sell time trial bikes.
Sure. Yeah.
So the more you want to ride that bike, the more we're on board with it. And so when I was considering that, I was like, I've won everything in XTERRA and multiple times, and I think I've achieved my goals there, and it's time to turn the page. And do something new. And certainly like athletes like Julie Dibbins that came into XTERRA and were like doing really well at both sports were inspirational in that regard. And so then I started to like investigate Ironman. Now the thing about that is that there's no question that my physiology, when I said I was really talented for XTERRA, like I really am, that is really how I'm built, is to do short, really powerful and stochastic efforts. Like, sure. I would be like, if I had like pursued, I would be a super sprint, right? Like that's actually like how my muscle fiber typology would trend. And so Ironman and long rides and long distance running were not my talent. And so the good thing about Ironman was it was like a real experience in, like the hard work over talent sort of thing, whereas XTERRA was a lot of talent without the hard work in advance, because it really was no sport made for me. And I'm really thankful that I had that opportunity. It was a journey, and I didn't really get to like the full Ironman until I was 42. And the reason that I kind of ever continued all this, because I never wanted to go to Kona. I was like, because like I am very like realistic about what my capacity is. Hot and long was not my deal. But it was like somebody told me when I was 37 that I was getting old. And I think that like just sort of like lit a little chip on my shoulder, like on fire. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not slowing down at all. Like, and so I think that like in the back of my mind during that time, it became like a crusade of like, I'm going to show you that I'm not slowing down at all, even though, here I'm going into something harder for me, but I was like, I'm going to prove this. Like 37 isn't old. And so I just carried on in that regard. And even when I made it to my first Ironman I finally decided to do one at 42, that's all anybody was talking about is how old I was at 42, not like what my potential was. And I'm really thankful that I did that, because I don't think people are saying that quite as much anymore.
Yeah. What do you think sort of allowed you to have that mental freshness? Because you, at that point, were already in the sport, in elite sport for 20 something years. And at least for me, I'm coming up on almost 20 years in triathlon, and I'm only 32. And people are already telling me, hey, dude, are you thinking about maybe hanging it up sometime soon? And I'm starting to think about it. And just because I'm getting the same sort of comments that maybe you were getting at 42. So I guess what helped you sort of mentally stay engaged when you're sort of getting those comments? I know you said that put a chip on your shoulder, but was there any little voice in the back of your head that was thinking like, maybe they're right?
Well, this is some advice that I give to all athletes, no matter how old they are. And in particular, it's the young ones that ask me like, okay, what does it take to make it? And I mean, like, you're going to get, as a coach, now I'm going to put my coach hat on. You can obviously see the athletes that come in with talent. They rise really quickly. They have these skills that they've never been coached for, and this aptitude that just exists, right? And so, like, certainly there's a sorting hat where the really talented just sort of are right away. And then you have, like, medium talent. Like, okay, there's probably adequate ability here, but then you have this something else, like this, like, first off, it's a work ethic. It's a certain amount of discipline. And how I would describe it is like unshakable belief in their potential. And I think that is the main thing that has allowed me to like continue this long, is I was just so stubbornly resistant to other people's opinion of my potential. And like, if I heard something negative, instead of being like, oh, damn, they don't think I'm good enough, I'd be like, I'll show you, right? Like, so it would always be that response to that sort of feedback. And I think that is, if there's any one thing that, like, certainly, like, you're not going to overcome like a complete lack of aptitude, like, I'm never going to run a 2:40 marathon off the bike. Like, I would never, no matter if I was 25, like, that's just not how I'm built. And so I was never going to win Kona. But I got to as good as I did very old, because I just always believed that my training was going to work. And it makes a huge difference no matter how old you are.
Yeah, I resonate that with that a ton. I just raced PuCon 2 weeks ago, and I made a social media post after the race saying I view everything as a challenge and nothing as a threat. And sometimes that gets in my way. And I think you need to sort of sift through that. But sort of that stubbornness, I think, is really important for athletes that don't have immense genetic talent. So that's really cool. You mentioned putting the coach hat on. I want to dive a little bit more into that, because it seems as though that's something you're passionate about and I'm passionate about as well. So let's dive in a little bit more on that. I'm curious, because you had such a long career that spanned decades with multiple people who were either mentors or coaches. What were maybe some things that you extracted from those coaches that you take on board with your coaching style today, and some of the things that you maybe observed and discarded?
Right. Okay. So I think first, like, I think a lot of athletes don't actually ever have a really great coaching relationship. They don't actually know what it's like to have a good coach. And I would say that in my very early days, like, I met Peg Moss was her name at the time, and she's the one who ID'd me for the road national team. And she was an example of a great coach who basically said, here's some opportunities for you, here's what you're good at, like, I'm going to try and like help you to like open these doors. And then I like also had some really bad coaches who were like, they would just apply a program that was designed for somebody else and just say, okay, this is what you're doing, without any like regard, observation, monitoring, or like consideration that like for probably 5 straight years, that program did not work for me. Right. So I think that a lot of my takeaway from some early experiences with coaching, particularly in cycling, and like a similar thing when I did have a coach once for 70.3, where it was like patently obvious that I was paying this person to take their program and just apply it into mine in Training Peaks, because they wouldn't even change like the watts, right? Like I'm not capable of that. And then I would go out and do that and kill myself, right? Yeah. So I had a couple really bad years of 70.3 trying to have a coach who wasn't coaching me well. So I think like I understand what I would want from a coach as a coach, because I've been an elite athlete where it matters a lot, like what I'm doing every day, what the communication is like, and how that program is laid out. And so that, and I, like in my mind, there's a few aspects of coaching that I think are really important for people to understand when they're vetting their coaches, because coaching is not like the program. It actually, like the actual like essence of what the workouts are is not actually that important. And a lot of people try to sell like that I have magic workouts that make all the difference. And that is not true. And I'm going to make a metaphor that I think really illustrates my point in this, where like what I think a coach is the closest to of another like job is a coach is more like a teacher, right? And so if you're in school and you have a teacher and they sit at their desk the entire hour of the class, and then at the end, like say, okay, here's your homework. This is what you're going to go home and do. And then they leave it on the board and then they leave. Okay, that's one kind of coach. Or you have a coach that spends the hour presenting you a concept, goes through it with you, like here's like this is what you need to understand about all these things. Make sure that maybe you're on board with like, okay, do you understand this? Do you have any more questions? You can come to me after class and ask more questions if you want to. Okay, and then you're going to go and experience what we're talking about here with this homework that's on the board. Okay, that is a coach. The coach is teaching you something about yourself, and every coach in the meantime actually has to learn something about you and how you learn, right? Like if you have a hard time reading and they give you a bunch of pages, you're not going to learn, right? They have to give you some way that you're going to absorb this knowledge. the same applies to a coach. A coach cannot scale a real coaching relationship. It's time. Like, you simply cannot have 100 athletes. There's not enough time. Yeah. And every time you work with athletes, you might have 2 athletes that are like, physically the same. Maybe like they even have the same strengths, and maybe they both have a D1 swimming background. Maybe both of them are terrible at cornering, and both of them like kind of, don't like running, right? But you could have these 2 athletes that maybe on paper, and maybe with some testing, with some numbers, they look the same, but they respond to training like in an entirely different way. And it takes a good coach to like learn and help athletes to learn about how they experience training, because that is the most important thing you need to learn as an athlete. Like, what is working for you? Like, what works? And the sooner that you can get to a place where you can describe that, coaches are making educated guesses on what the best approach might be to like getting you to your goals, and they just like course correct according to feedback, or like feedback either subjective from you or like objective from measurement. But ultimately it's like taking an educated guess on what's going to work for you, and the longer you work together, the more likely you're going to get these guesses right. But I think that athletes need to understand that that's how coaching is really coaching, and it's not some magical program, because it's not the workouts. It's really figuring out what's going to work for you and teaching you that, so you have better language and understanding of how you respond to training.
Yeah. I am curious to hear your perspective in this day and age of people like you and people like myself who are really passionate about triathlon, who have been in the sport for 20 years, have actual physical degrees, but also immense degrees by experience. How do we preserve what is defined and what we agree is defined as good coaching versus something like AI, versus something like the person who's done triathlon for 2 years and done an Ironman and now marketing themselves as a coach because they've done Ironman U or Training Peaks Level 1 or whatever it might be. Like, how do we ensure that there's a differential between people like us who really are passionate about coaching and have the understanding of what it takes to be a good coach and how to pass along that information and how to teach, versus the other people who are just saying, I'm a coach and I'm doing this in addition to my job at whatever?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is like maybe communicating this and explaining that there is a difference. Like, I think that once you've been an athlete for long enough, just like I said, I've had lots of bad coaches and I've had some really great coaches. And I've also had some great mentors, that I think that there's experiential learning that I think pro athletes get because they have access to high performance coaches that generally can be good, but not always, right? And being a teacher requires a lot of communication skills and communication interpretation. And one of the most meaningful mentorships I had was with Dan Paff, and he's from sprinting, right? He's from he coached really fast Olympic sprinters. So it's not that close to endurance coaching. So none of the workouts really are important. So we never really talked about context of training. I did learn a lot about biomechanics and skills from him in one of the 4 years we worked together. But one of the things that he worked with me a lot on is understanding communication with athletes and reading athletes and different personality types and the emotional side of relationships, being able to respond to things versus to react, so that you maintain your ability, you help athletes to navigate the emotions of this stuff, and building trust and buy-in and all that kind of stuff. And I just think when you're I've never advertised my coaching. I just get athletes. I generally retain athletes and they tell other athletes. And I'm never going to have a big business. And I just think you either are the CEO of an empire of coaches that vary in ability, right? Like the coaches that work under you, some of them are going to be good and some of them are not going to be good. But if your objective is to make money and build a really big coaching business, generally you start to drift away from the actual coaching itself. And so I think that it just depends on that person, like meaning the coaches, long-term objective in terms of like what they want as a coach. I identified it really early on that I don't really enjoy the business side of coaching at all. I don't like it. I don't advertise. I'm fortunate in that I don't need to make millions of dollars. I just need to like make enough to feed my pug and buy him toys and, and I just enjoy the relationships and the coaching stuff. And so, so that works for me. But like different coaches, I empathize with the fact that it's, like I said, it's hard for athletes to vet their coaches and understand the difference between like a good coach and another. And that's why I always like encourage people to talk to people about what it's like to work with coaches. And also like, I think it's one thing for like age group athletes. So let's talk about an age group athlete and their goals. Now, some athletes are going to get better if they just do anything, right? They just are active. And those athletes are not going to learn a lot technically. So if they don't like know what they're doing, they're probably not going to learn a lot technically, but they're probably going to be more active than before. And AI might be enough. If it motivates them to do anything, right? You can, it's like eggs against the wall. If you just keep generating some aerobic fitness, you're probably going to improve in the early stages. But as you get better and you want to like start to fine tune your ability and climb the ranks, the specifics of what you're doing are going to become more important. And that's where I don't think that AI has any capacity to be sensitive enough to really understand this. Like I signed myself up for AI, and I'll give you a perfect example. The first thing it asked me was to put in what my 400 meter long course time was for swimming, so it could like determine my swim program, right? And so I put in what my time is, and it didn't ask me what the volume I did was to acquire that time, the frequency of swimming, like what my 1,000 meter, what my 50 meter, any of that, just like what was this time. And then it comes back to me with a program where I would then swim like 1,100 meters 3 times a week. Right? And at the time, in order for me to acquire that pace, I was swimming 25 kilometers a week, right? Yeah. So it just in terms of even like benchmarking your start place, AI does not have the capacity to, so for me, it would just never even be close to like understanding at all what it requires for me to do what I do at 52, right? So that's where I would like be cautious. And also like the other problem with beginner athletes is like that, like AI programs are really dependent on the quality of the data that you feed into the algorithm. And if you're just a cyclist, very often like it's more foolproof to like constantly feed data from a power meter because the constraint of movement is less. And so the quality of that data is more consistent. But when you add up like swimming and running, like it can't tell like your run was hilly or you're tired and so your cadence is lower or like whatever, right? Like it just cannot parse that data. And so you are, in most cases, from what I can see and what I've discussed with other coaches that have used some of these platforms, is that it generally under trains you, which is kind of good because like at least you're not getting killed, but it's also not going to work for athletes that are really trying to maximize their ability.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, so that's AI, right? So that's just Cole's notes. And obviously I'm very biased because I offer a very like customized one-on-one sort of solution for people. So I have a huge bias in this, and but I don't feel at all threatened by AI because it's not anything that's going to come close to what I think real coaches are doing. But one of the things that I have some skin in the game with, and I would caution for professional athletes, is that, there's a professional athletes tend to then choose their coaches based on a coach that coached other professional athletes.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And so the same coaches get athletes. And some of those coaches are amazing, and they should get those athletes because they're really good. But it's like the statistics. The likelihood of you coaching a pro athlete depends on your coaching a pro athlete.
Correct. For sure.
And so I think coaches, like athletes, are going to coaches looking at what the athletes have accomplished, not looking at what the coach has done. And so it was interesting. I was talking to like a pro athlete. This was like back when I was like trying to think about getting a coach. And she told me that she had a 3 strikes you're out rule with coaches, where if she got injured 3 times, she would then move to another coach. And that's probably the most intelligent way of objectively measuring your relationship with a coach, because the number one driver of injury is programming. So athletes are going to these coaches because they've had access to talent that's able to do like amazing things. And they haven't looked at the injury rates and the athletes that did not survive. And most of the time, these coaches become top of mind because they've had this success and the avalanche of pro athletes that go to that coach. So they have these numbers is based on, like outlying talent. And so I think that this is something like, whether you're a really high performing age grouper or you're a pro athlete, you need to look at, okay, what type of athlete is this coach working with? What kind of development? Like, did they just get a good athlete and like carry on with them for like a year and they were still good? Or did they get a good athlete and they weren't as good? Or like, what did they do that actually changed the performance of that athlete in a good or bad way? Because I think that's super important. And also, like, what kind of athlete are you? Because like I said, like how you respond to training, I think by the time you're a pro, I would hope that you would know that. But what kind of athlete are you? Like, are you like a macro absorber or a micro adjuster? Like, are you a person who like basically needs a little bit of training, but the exact right amount and a little bit too much and you're over the edge? Or are you just like throw the kitchen sink at you and you'll just absorb it all, right? So coaches have a bias. And that I think is an important thing to know when you're deciding. And so I'm approaching this question from a professional, trying to say to these young professional athletes, vet your coaches, because like there's this backlash against coaches because some athletes think it's the coach, but maybe you just didn't partner with the right one, right? And like think about that stuff in advance. And there are very good coaches out there, and I like I said, it's not something that you can scale, so you can't have lots of athletes at once, especially if it's pro. But I do think that most professional athletes will do better. I wish that I had created a good relationship with a coach earlier in my career, rather than trying to farm this out in like multiple pieces. I just didn't have like the right coach available to me at the time, and then by the time I was like old, there was no coach that had experience with being old. And I was it was kind of like in the time of my XTERRA career where I was the best advocate because I was trying so hard to learn about it. But I think that a lot of professional athletes will definitely benefit and push their career further, faster with a good coach relationship that they vetted properly.
Nice. Awesome perspective. And this has been super fun getting to know more about you and more about your backstory and your coaching. I think if people want to learn more about your coaching or what you have going on in 2026, they can find you Instagram, Milrad Coaching. Where else?
I have a website. It's milrad.com. So a little bit of stuff about like things that my squad is doing, but Instagram's probably the easiest place to find me as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Mel. It was great chatting with you, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Justin. I wish you the best of years.
Thank you very much. Cheers.